Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast, where we break down the practical strategies of this emerging science, starting with healthy light habits and going wherever the quantum superhighway takes us. This is your host, Meredith Oke, and we'd also love to hear from you. Visit www.quantumbiologycollective.org and click QBC newsletter to join the conversation. If you're a regular listener to this podcast, you probably have got the idea that regulated circadian rhythms bring harmony to our biology, and artificial light at night causes chaos. And this is just one example of the effect of frequencies on our health. So whether we're aligning our circadian rhythms or clearing our environment of toxic frequencies, the main goal that we're seeking is one that our guest today has a deep understanding of: quantum coherence. That's what we're really after when we engage in all of these practices and learn how important light is and learn about the difference between healthy light and toxic light and anything else really that we do for our health. It's all centered around bringing our bodies into coherence. So I was really excited to have this beautiful conversation with Dr. Christine Schaffner. She's a board-certified naturopathic doctor, the host of the Spectrum of Health podcast, and currently the host of the online summit, The Art and Science of Cultivating Coherence. She's worked with thousands of patients, and in this conversation, she shares both her clinical and her personal experience of the amazing results working in this new field of medicine. Enjoy. Hello, Dr. Christine Schaffner. Welcome to the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. I'm so happy to have you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's just, I'm so excited to connect with you and your community. And, it takes a team, right, to bring these principles and concepts to a lot more people.
It does. And I find that everybody has their own unique flavor and their own unique weaving of experiences and understanding. And so even asking the same question over and over, I get, just a slight variation, and it's like a musical interpretation. So
yeah, I love it.
I love it. Mm-hmm. And yes, I have had many people tell me I need to have you on, but so our audience is very familiar with you. However, just in case there are some people who aren't, or maybe people who aren't up to date on your story, could you tell us a little bit? You do such a beautiful job, especially with your summits, of bringing the ideas of the electric body and quantum coherence to a larger audience. Yes. But your background is more in a quite sort of traditional naturopathic training. So how did you land in this frequency world?
Yeah. Thank you for asking that. And, I look back and it's funny, we're all on our path, right? And, I went to naturopathic school after really growing up in a, really conventional family. My dad's an oncologist, my mother is a nursing background. And so this was like a really big leap for me to become a naturopathic doctor and, really not go the conventional medical route. So I was already kind of in this, quest and curiosity to look at these deeper ideas around health and healing. It was just always just innately within me. Back when we had bookstores, I would always be into science and spirituality and, those types of, sections. And so, I found myself at Bastyr and, here I am. I've been practicing 13 years now, and a little bit over, I would say 13 years. And, from the get-go, I have seen patients from really all over the country and all over the world. And I have been trained in bioregulatory medicine, which is this really beautiful medicine that comes out of Europe. And so it really was kind of up-leveling my naturopathic medical roots. I remember when I was in school, Louisa Williams' book, Dr. Louisa Williams, her book, Radical Medicine, came out, and she did a brown bag lunch. And I just remember saying to myself, I just want to learn everything that's in that book and whatever she's saying, and I would carry that book around before the Kindle. It would go everywhere with me. And she really opened my ideas up to this bioregulatory medicine. And again, that comes out of Germany and Austria and Switzerland. And, they look at really regulation in the body, and they look at Our job is to really find those blocks about, why are people's bodies and their nervous systems primarily not being able to self-regulate and heal. So it's very like autonomic nervous system focused. However, there's a language around interference fields, so like dental foci and toxicity and scars. And then they do have a lot of insight into bioenergetics and biophysics. A lot of the German doctors will use bioresonance devices to kind of like hone in. So I was like around a lot of that. I also studied, forms of muscle testing, and I, really developed that core in my, practice. And I would say like my kind of like desire to dive deeper and deeper into like the biophysics of life and biophysics of healing. And that of course leads to the, quantum, biology insights and all of that, were really, driven by my patients. I see people who have like, they've been sick often, some of them for like a decade. And then they, are in the search of like, they go through such medical gaslighting and trauma just to find like what's wrong with them. And, then they find a practitioner that they can work with or has like a language around like this kind of like terrain medicine that we do. But it takes time, right? It takes a while. Like you get a diagnosis, you find the right practitioner. Often it will take maybe 3 years or so for me to really recover somebody or really get them their quality of life back. And so these are like long-term relationships. And even past those 3 years, I'm still very much in contact, with my patients. And there's just this desire in me and this quest of, just how can we like really find this elegant path to healing? How can we like shorten the time for a patient by the time of diagnosis and really understanding of how they're wired to heal, to recovery, right? And regeneration, right? And, quality of life. And I think we have a lot of work to do still in, the field about that. And I think when we learn about the physics of life and the field interactions and the, quantum field and how we're wired to really truly heal, I think the physics of life offer a faster, really truly root cause of healing. So that had just put me on a quest to like explore, right? And I'm still very much a student. I really feel that way of all of this, but it, really drove me to do those, summits you mentioned. So I did 2 body electric summits and a relaunch. And so over 250,000 people like signed up and they, joined us, which, when I told people I had this idea, they thought I was nuts and didn't think like anybody would tune in. This was like, obviously several years ago before people like yourself and your community are out there educating. And, I interviewed hundreds of people and, I really, studied sound and light and frequency and, the electromagnetic field interactions and the biophotonic interactions and biophononic interactions in the body. And I come to this philosophy of like, how do we marry our bioregulatory understanding with really this upgraded, information, whether we call it quantum biology or coherence medicine or biofield science or, bioenergetics, whatever, there's many names for like what we're all trying to work with, right? Mm-hmm. We have to, I feel like, combine, like a true protocol is combining these worlds and these insights to create a path, for really true recovery and, repair and regeneration. And, I'll pause a moment. I had a personal story within a year ago, like that really deepened my understanding about, energy medicine and healing that I'm happy to share if it feels, resonant, but, that's kind of like my path. And, I'll pause for a moment, Meredith. Do you want me to expand upon anything before I dive into my personal story?
Yeah, but we can circle back. I'll circle back to that. Yeah, I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I just wanted to invite you because
thanks for checking.
Long, So about a year ago, like I had, like a lot of us, 2020 presented a lot of challenges, a lot of life changes, and I went through an extreme life change where I was switching over practices, starting new, and in the backdrop of COVID in Seattle, and like all these crazy stuff, and there was a lot of stress going on, and I was, chalking up to some physical symptoms that I thought just were like stress, like they were on the endocrine level, like my menstrual cycle started disappearing. I also just had some, other kind of symptoms. And I also thought like, I just had a baby a couple of years ago. I'm under stress, like this is all going to resolve itself. And my husband and I had desired to have another child. And he was like, Christine, like, we're like not getting any younger. Like, why don't we just like go get checked out? And I'm like, it's hard to be your own doctor, right? So I'm like, okay, fine. So the doctor kind of worked me up in the way that I would have probably. And, she suggested an MRI eventually because, she's like, there's obviously some clear pituitary dysfunction here and we need to just like go deeper. And, I dragged my feet, she probably gave me the, MRI requisition in February. And it was like not until June rather that I got, the MRI done. I tend to be like a bad patient, all like,
yes.
all world. And so I got an MRI like on a Monday. I talked to the doctor that had prescribed that the day later, and I could see her fumble over her words, not in that, she's a very smart woman, but I could see that she was trying to deliver like some tough information to me. And I like paused her at a point because she was starting to say, Christine, you have quite a large structure, in your MRI. And, and I had to stop her. I'm like, do I have brain cancer or is this, like a benign pituitary tumor? Like I had to let, because it wasn't coming out.
To the
and so
bottom line it for me.
I know, I'm like, okay, what's going on? So she's like, you have a pretty large, tumor that it's benign, but it's secreting growth hormone. It's, basically flattened your pituitary and, basically putting stress on your optic chiasm. And I had noticed some visual changes at night that I later learned that they were bilateral. So I didn't perceive any deficits because they were symmetrical. But the day later, she was just like, you got to talk to a neurosurgeon and, like you have to have neurosurgery. And here I educate people about brain detoxification and the lymphatic system. And I'm like, I can't have brain surgery. This is insane. But the day later, the neurosurgeon's office is calling me and the doctor wants to talk to me before surgery. And I'm like, okay, what's going on? And, I was really actually quite surprised. He was a very great bedside manner, which was not very usual, for that field, to be honest. In my other interactions with patients. And, he said I had a very treatable tumor, but it needed surgery because I was at risk for stroke and, basically damage to my optic nerve. And
that's a lot.
I know the tumor that it would shorten my life by 20 years and like all this kind of crazy stuff. But he was like, it's very treatable. That's the good news. And so thank goodness there are people on the planet like him. And they have developed a technique that they can take, this tumor out through your nasal passages. So they go through your sphenoid bone, and through the sphenoid bone.
It's incredible what they can do.
I know. And
these techniques are really amazing.
There's a place for this type of medicine.
Yeah.
Right? It can't be like the, gold standard for chronic illness or, these, all the things that we'll talk about. And so, but in those 2 weeks that I had from talking to him to being scheduled, to surgery, there wasn't much time for me to do things that would really manipulate my physiology, right? I took care of myself. I did things, but I was studying meditation and I had gone through the work of, Joe Dispenza. And, he says something, like in a lot of his teachings that just strikes a chord with me. And he says to change matter with matter takes time, but when you change the field, you change matter. And his quest to, basically try to communicate, what kind of healings happen in that community. And so, what, I saw was okay, there's a moment you have your dark night, your soul, you have your fear, and then you have your choice, right? And I made a decision that I was going to go through this and I was going to do everything in my power to have the best outcome. And so I had dear friends circle around me. I, was involved in the work with Lynn McTaggart. So I did intention circles and I did a coherence healing and I worked with energy workers and I did a ton of meditation. And I was working with these principles I think we can really dive into around coherence when we really think about it. And we're all just visualizing, right? Visualizing how can this tumor come out easily? fast forward, I got through the surgery, thank goodness. And I had a, really, good outcome. And, like I took time to heal. And, I used all my biophysics to help me heal, like my, Weber helmet and, all the things, right?
Yeah.
And my experience was validated. That I'm trying to get to the point of my story here, that the neurosurgeon in his follow-up of my experience, I was at a university hospital, so I donated some of the tumor to research. And, I asked about the pathology report. And this was like at the end of a follow-up appointment, really like, if I hadn't asked, it would have, a whole kind of conversation would have slipped by. Yeah. And he said, Christine, like, I'm really going to be, studying your tumor for a long time. It has different cell types. And most of all, out of the 400 surgeries I do here, I really want to understand why yours came out so easily. And in my experience, in my, story of this story, I really feel like that was kind of a validation that I'm on the right track. Like when we really work with the fields of the body, yes, like I chose to have a physical procedure, but these principles, I think, can, if you're faced with a decision like myself, and like, yes, I believe in miracles and anything is possible, but I had a young daughter at the time, and this was really serious information, so I chose to go through the procedure.
And that surgeon was your miracle.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Exactly. Right. Totally. That all lined up really lovely for me.
Yeah.
So like we can have an empowered view on life, that we can really impact our outcomes and really work with these fields that we're going to talk about. And, that work matters, and that work changes matter. And I think the root cause is on that level and in many ways. And so, here I am, like fast forward a year and a half now, and, that's behind me. But that message was like, I really feel like I went through that experience to deepen my commitment and devotion to this work and to this, seeking out, what we're going to have a conversation around. But yeah, so that, it's one thing to teach, but it's another thing to experience through yourself and the body. And so I felt like I had like a final exam in many ways, going through that experience. But
absolutely. Yeah. And to have such a tangible result. So the surgeon was saying that when he examined the tissue of the tumor, it was different than other tumors that he usually saw.
Yeah. Wow. And he was also seeing like the quality in the surgery. Like he wouldn't have commented on this if I didn't like kind of, ask about, the pathology. He said that, basically in the procedure that, he was doing, he's a very confident surgeon and does a ton of these, that like there was, we were trying to visualize. I mean, you have a large like tumor. It was like the size of an egg, which is kind of like crazy to think of, like in the middle of my brain, and it can affect different structures. It can be sticky. It can be, like there could be all sorts of things that could, maybe not get a whole clean, margin, and to take it all out, so we were really working with, what's going to happen to help, really facilitate, the removal and the best outcome possible. And his experience, I think that tangible experience that he had was how I do think what I did in those 2 weeks mattered.
Yeah, because it just he just sort of pulled it right out.
He could pull it right out.
Like a clean.
Yeah, he got all of it. Like because the tumor produced hormones, we could measure my hormones right away, and all of them went back to normal within the next day. Yeah, and if there was any left behind, you would have seen a trail. Yeah,
that's amazing.
Yeah, I know. I think it was fascinating. I say it, I still it feels surreal,
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know, right? It's like, really?
Yeah, I went through that. Oh my gosh, like, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And thank you for sharing this story, as I try to bring up a lot on the podcast that, we're all human when we're all going through our journeys. And I know that like when I listen to podcasts, I tend to like a little bit idealize the people talking like, oh, they must do everything perfectly.
Yeah, I know. And I hear that from patients too. Like people who are kind of maybe out there educating and maybe more like, more well known on a pedestal. And they just think like, we don't have problems, or
Yeah.
like
Got it all together. You've got it all figured out. You do all
and
the
it's like, yeah, it's like, we teach what we want to learn, right? And
yeah.
we're all going to be like confronted on some level, like maybe not that extreme, like what I just shared, but in our journey to strengthen our insight, to strengthen our experience, and continue sharing. And the world is so stressful right now. Like nobody is completely, I would say, immune from what we're, the fields we're in and the environment that we're in. It's impacting all of us, even if you do everything perfect. And that's why I think this conversation that we're having and how we tend our own inner environment and generate our own inner coherence and what that looks like is a way through these times, because, I think we're called to look there. I think that's really the way forward, the future.
Yes. Yeah. And layering in whatever is needed and whatever will work. It's funny. I did a podcast a few weeks ago with a man who started doing all of the practices and spending time in nature and being outside and getting more sun and doing all the things. And he had a lower back pain, and, he just had an intuition to look into it, because his job caused back pain a lot, but he just had intuition to look into it a little more. And it turned out that he had a tumor on his kidney. And so it's interesting, because it's a similar story. He kept doing all his things. He had the surgery went well, but it was like, he felt like the time that he was spending in nature had heightened his intuition, right?
Yes.
Which led him to catch it, which led him and have the ways to support himself through a surgery, just like you did. Yeah. So it's like, we never know how everything's going to work together.
Yes. Yeah. And
along the way.
I think sometimes, when we gravitate to like, what we both clearly gravitate towards, sometimes there can be this like purism, right? Like that develops, like we only can do it this way. And I think we're humbled, right? In life, again, we're all having a human experience. And like, if you're out there and, facing like the last thing you want to do is conventional medicine, but you're faced with a choice, like you might have to interact with that world a little bit. How do you feel empowered, and how do you feel really like that you can be in the driver's seat of that experience, no matter what that looks like, and what you're sharing and what you're educating and what we're all are, here today, really makes sure that you can have the smoothest path through that experience,
Yes, exactly. And to what you were just saying, right? It's like, the more we understand, the better choices we can make, because we can't, I mean, no one's getting out of here. Unassaulted by.
Yes, totally. It was a soul contract we all signed up for,
So it's like, the more health choices we can make that support our coherence, then when those assaults come, because they will, whether it's a trauma or being in an airport or whatever, like we have some resilience to it.
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. So let's talk about that, because as I was saying before, we look at a lot, we talk about quantum biology on this podcast, and circadian biology, and all of those things. And the ultimate goal with all of it is to keep our bodies out of chaos and in coherence.
Yes.
So tell me how you explain coherence or quantum coherence.
Yeah, absolutely. It's, a beautiful question. And, we'll talk obviously about the summit we just created. And I asked all these experts and got all these like nuanced, just different, definitions, and kind of where I sit with how I explain it. Like, for the folks who are listening, who probably can understand this, definition from kind of like a micro level, it's like when there's a synchronization of oscillating fields or waves, right? Especially within the body. And we know, right, in this community, we know that there's a lot of electromagnetic information in the body, electromagnetic fields that are, through basically communicating within us. us. Whenever you have like a charged particle moving through a conductor, you generate an electrical and a magnetic field. And then also when you have coiled, basically, molecules like collagen or DNA, you generate a magnetic field that can generate electrical fields. So we know that just through physics, we are generating fields, and they serve as a communication network in the body as well. And we see that through the heart, and the heart's electromagnetic field, and we see that through the brain waves. And we also see light information, because light is just another wavelength of information in a different frequency. And we see, through Fred Albert Pop, we know there's biophotonic information that's being communicated through cells. And I'm also fascinated by this idea of sound information or biophononic information being communicated. So there are all of these, oscillating waves within the body, and not only within us, but around us, right? So we can communicate these waves between people. So coherence can be a synchronization between people. And we can dive into what that means and, the heart interactions between people. And then there's a synchronization that can develop between the fields of nature, or really Mother Earth. And there's beautiful symmetry. And it's a very beautiful story that we can talk about there. And then kind of from like a macro level, like if you want to just kind of like think about it as coherence can really describe an alignment of energy, more harmony, more order. The opposite of that, especially when we think in the body, is there can be a isolation, compartmentalization. There can be more entropy or disorder, or that's where that environment is where like senescent cells can live, or cancer can thrive. And the whole goal, and when we're developing a healthy organism, is how do we get this like coherent, whole body synchronized, harmonious, aligned energy, right, between the heart and the brain, and between, I've kind of made up this idea that I don't know if it's completely accurate, but it's kind of what I see, like the heart, brain, and the fascia, and how they can, generate and maintain this like coherent, information. And, you begin to see the story, right? Like, how are we adding more health and coherence to our lives? Or how are we adding more like chaos and disorder and non-alignment and, desynchronization and decoherence in our lives? And we also can get, down to the nitty-gritty of how like we can modulate these fields in the body through our emotional state, which we all have, seemingly we all have the power to modulate, our emotional state. But some people need need to go through some work, which we hold space for that. So that's really kind of where I sit when I, talk about coherence. And, and again, the work of heart math. And that's why I asked Dr. Roland McCready to really co-host the summit with me. They really have done a really awesome job of, really sharing this really beautiful science between, the heart and the brain, and the hearts of each other and between each other, and our heart interactions with, the field interactions of Mother Earth. They're studying trees now too. So they're studying, basically.
That is so cool.
Yeah, the field interactions between fields. Yeah, Dr. McCready is really cool in that way. And then they, really are studying the impact of Mother Earth's information and, our relationship. And, again, we can unpack all that. And then they just took on the consciousness project that Dr. Roger Nelson, put into play in Princeton. And so they have their hands full, and they're doing really, the story feels very like almost too simple and too elegant, but the science is complex, where they have, developed these understandings. And again, I can, wherever you want to go.
Oh gosh. Okay. There's so many places.
Yeah.
But I mean, I also love what you just said, because the practical applications are quite simple, but then when you get down into the why, there's a complexity there, and layers of all of these different researchers, some of whom you mentioned, and that go back over decades, and then it all comes together in a very coherent story. Okay. So where should we go? Okay. So you mentioned your theory of the brain heart fascia.
Yes.
So expand on that one. Let's
Yeah,
start there.
I'd love to. So, just to maybe first just get people up to speed to my understanding of the fascia, and then I'll talk about the heart and the brain.
Perfect.
So you can understand where I'm going from. So, the fascia really fascinates me. You know, my patients have taught me this, and I think that's a really strength of bioregulatory medicine. Yes, they really focus on the autonomic nervous system, but there's a lot of talk around the fascia, and we learn a lot about the fascia when we treat scars. And so the fascia is, you know, like when we study anatomy, right, we think of all these compartments in the body, but it's really like one big fabric when you think about it. And the fascia is an umbrella term, you know, for that, you know, really fabric that interconnects every, you know, in like part of our being right inside our body. And the fascia has all these wonderful, like really cool properties. And again, within the fascia is the lymphatics. Also, the blood can be called liquid fascia when you think about it too. So when you think about the extracellular matrices and the lymphatics that, you know, drain them, and also the lymphatic connection with the circulatory system, and, you know, the fascial kind of, you know, network, that it's all really, I believe, one system that's, you know, connected and communicating. And they all like are very much interrelated. And I am happy to dive into that more. But the beauty of the fascia is a couple of things. This doctor who developed, you know, really, I think, modern day understanding of the fascia, Dr. Jean-Claude Gumberto, who has those beautiful like YouTubes about looking at like the hand surgeries that he did, that he tied off the blood and, you know, looked with a, you know, microscope, basically camera, you know, really what the fascia really looked like, because living fascia is very different than dead fascia. And so when we cadaver lab is just like cutting through the cadaver, you know, you just think, oh, it's just there as a syringe and a structure.
And that's certainly, just to jump in for a minute, I think a lot of people's, perspective on the fascia, it's like, oh, it's not really that important. Like, it's just kind of, I mean, like the muscles do all the work and the joints are this, but like the fascia, whatever. But what you're saying is, we now know that it's like this superhighway blanket wrapped all around us.
Totally.
Superconductor.
Totally, exactly. That's exactly what it is. And, you know, it, you know, what he showed, and when you see these pictures, and there's a great book, The Architecture of Human Living Fascia. I mean, it's really a beautiful book. And what he shows, you know, is that really that, you know, the fascia transports our plasma state, or the H3O2, or the structured coherent water within the body. So then it now has a story of hydrating our cells and hydrating our tissues, but also it generates electricity. It's piezoelectric. So with this movement of not only the water that, you know, holds electrical charge and negative charge, and, you know, really, you know, is really important in flow systems, but also it, you know, with every step, you know, especially collagen is the most abundant protein within the fascia. This collagen matrix basically is a communication, you know, network. It's this very powerful highway, as you alluded to, and with every movement and every step, and you know, generating and this tension and this tensegrity within this fascial network, it generates an electromagnetic field. It also is a superconductor of, you know, protons and electrons and biophotons. I think probably
And this is why, like, grounding and having healthy light on our bodies, because that's powering all of this that you're explaining.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you know, again, I learned from May Wan Ho, who was a biophysicist who's passed, and she talks a lot about the fascia and, you know, this piezoelectric, and she calls it even like liquid crystal. And you know, she also talks about how it's probably the acupuncture system within the fascia. Again, there's, you know, even these bong hand ducts, or these perivascular basically network, that are these like thinner fabrics within it, that she also thought was aligned to the acupuncture system. So it's a very misunderstood fabric, and it holds also information. It can hold our memory and our traumas and our emotional state. And that's what we see with like scar therapy that we do. We do scar injections to kind of really open that up in the office. And, you know, what Jean-Claude...
Could you say a little more about that, the scar therapy? That is so fascinating.
Yeah, it's really cool. It just educates me every day. And So, I mean, like, I have like so many wacky stories, there, but I have like really cool anecdotes is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
But so what Dr. Jean-Claude Gumberto, like he made my understanding of why this works so well, like even with his pictures, even that I've been doing it for so long, and then, seeing this like deeper understanding. So, the fascial fabric in its original state is this beautiful, flexible, whole body network, right?
Mm-hmm.
But when we get injured, when we're either cut or we're, have surgery, we basically form a plug in that, basically fascial fabric. So doesn't look like the scar tissue doesn't look like the original like fascial fabric. And so it's necessary. Thank goodness our body creates it, but it's denser. It's, more irregular. There's less
it's like clogging up that conductive highway.
Yeah, I call it like a traffic jam. So it over time, can create like a traffic jam in that electrical network, in that communication network. It's kind of like almost like isolated, right? So again, here, entropy could, basically, it's a isolated area, right? That can also collect more pathogens and toxicants and hold trauma from why you had the injury. So there's a technique that bioregulatory medicine teaches called neural therapy. And neural therapy is an injection technique. We actually use a compounded form of procaine, which is a local anesthetic, but it has this really beautiful property that helps to break down scar tissue and helps to reset the electrical charge of the cells, like the cell voltage, we work with. And it helps to alleviate, like, think of a saran wrap, like if there's a crinkle in the saran wrap, like the other like tissues even far away are going to be affected, right? And so it can relax kind of this basically traffic jam, and that can alleviate stress in, distal areas because it's all one system. And so what we see when we inject scars, so like think of a C-section scar, or we're all born with, we get our umbilical cord cut and we have a belly button. That's actually a scar. Think even like if you've had, mole removed or, anything like that.
So even a small scar can have this effect.
Oh yeah. Just little scars are really fun to inject because you can really see a lot of different things. And so like just some examples, like, C-section scars, they basically cut off the communication, from the upper and lower channels of the body. When you look at it from an energy perspective, it can also hold a lot of trauma. Like a lot of women, some women have planned C-sections, but a lot of women who go through that, they often don't plan it, right? And often can be like an emergency situation. So that tissue actually can hold that memory. And, that can be just as much of a turbulent kind of, part of why it creates, blockage and, information in that area. So through that injection, there's a relaxation and an opening and an invitation for the body to release that. And what often happens, people can all of a sudden, like cry and have like a really visceral response. It's not from the mind, it's from the body. I also see like, I've injected like a melanoma scar and someone's heart palpitations, went away.
Wow.
Recently I just injected, I was working with a friend and my friend had breast cancer and we injected her, breast scars that, unfortunately from surgeries and lumpectomies and, all of it. And my friend who's very intuitive, she like tuned in. This cancer was a lot about your mother's relationship, you and your mother's relationship. And her mother was just put into hospice. And when she came home, she's like out of hospice, she's healing. Like there's like a global field, like kind of ripple effect that's, happening from their relationship that can have an impact. I see like, the C-section scar being impactful on the kids, so there's like this really cool, I mean,
that is very quantum.
Yes, totally. Quantum entanglement, right?
That is some non-local responses.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Thanks for, that was really beautiful that you just said that because it just, continues to, I try to give people a language for like when these things happen, what's happening. Right. And, of course we're working with those principles, right? How could we not be? So like circulating back, like I have studied, that there's some conversations going around, and because I witnessed stuff like that, that the fascial network can communicate faster than the autonomic nervous system and then nervous system network. That if we were just working on like the electrical impulses that are generated in the nerves, that would be almost too slow for some of the things that we're talking about.
Yes.
So just I don't know how, I mean, there's a lot of great ideas and a great, science around this. It's still not obviously accepted, but it's just like a thought, right? And I lean towards that thought because of the power of the experiences I see when we treat this fabric, right? And
just to clarify, so the fascia is like a superhighway conducting signals through our quantum information yes. faster than the nervous system, and certainly faster than anything biochemistry can explain.
Yes.
And sometimes scar tissue causes blockages in that communication, which
very much
show up as symptoms.
Yes.
So when you treat the scar and open up the scar, you see those symptoms that are seemingly unrelated start to resolve.
Yes. And
this is so crazy. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make this clear.
Yeah. I know.
So cool.
Give it a recap, right?
So cool. Okay.
Yeah. I know. And it's so cool for me to teach this because it's still like, it's so part of my world, but it's still such a weird kind of fringe part of like, medicine that, not many people know about this or know how to do this. And which is a very simple technique. If you have the power to inject, it's not too hard.
What do you inject in there?
It was the Procaine that I mentioned, and you can add homeopathics, to it, or you can do ozone afterward, depending, what you want to do. But, the goal is that we're breaking down that scar tissue, making it more fluid, more communicative with the surrounding tissues. We're releasing anything that needs to be released and healed that's stored on the emotional, energetic level. And we're restoring coherence in the fascial network. So it's really quite beautiful. So, so as you mentioned, like it's this thought, right? Like, okay, like this is a powerful highway, right? This is a powerful part of us. And, so we talk about the heart and the brain because that's a really, really cool science, right? Around heart rate variability and how when we modulate our emotional state, for people who don't know what heart rate variability is real quick, heart rate variability, like part of the beating of our heart is really unique. Like every beat that our heart beats, which is really from, the womb to where you are now to, when you transition to the other world, there's no two beats that are the same. And they measure the variability between beats through the time interval between a beat to a beat. That's heart rate variability. And what they find is when we, look at heart rate variability, the more variable your heart rate is, the healthier and more flexible and resilient your nervous system is. It's a sign of health. The less variable it is, the more rigid, the more inflexible you are, the less resilience you have, probably less order you have in the body, which is a misnomer. And this is new science. Like in the last 20 to 30 years, they thought the heart was just like the metronome, effect.
I was, hearing you and Roland talk about that. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's always what I thought. And now people are talking to me about my HRV and how it needs to be higher. And I'm like,
it's kind of like
everything we knew is being different around.
And, in bioregulatory medicine, we have something called rigid regulation, and that's a poor sign of health. And when people are rigid and not responding and their system is very inflexible, that's a harder system to turn around. So you can kind of think of it in that way too, right? So
could that be like in sort of like being stuck in like being stressed all the time, or being
freeze
unable to
mode.
like kind of let the day go and just relax and be like, oh, I'm home with my children now. I don't need to worry about all that stuff, and like be able to play back and forth like that.
Yeah, people who are like sympathetically dominant, or they're still like in their trauma, or they're very much, their body is basically over, time had a lot of these stressors that we educate people about that have impacted, their fascia and their autonomic nervous system's ability to communicate and function, so it's kind of more about that. And, the story around, heart brain coherence has to do with heart rate variability, right? So what Dr. McCready, found out was that when we are in positive states of love, appreciation, and gratitude, we have more of a, basically when you map out mathematically the heart rate variability, it's more of a very, very coherent sine wave that is generated from the electrical field and the magnetic field that can be measured. And, when we're in states of worry, frustration, anger, anxiety, we're in a very incoherent, we generate a very incoherent electromagnetic field. And what's very interesting, I didn't know this, right? And, I didn't think about this when I was studying physiology or anatomy. But the heart actually sends more information to the brain than the brain to the heart. And there are afferent connections from the heart to the limbic brain, as well as there's a whole nervous system plexus in the heart, like about 40,000 sensory neurites. So, and the heart has a stronger both electrical and magnetic field, stronger than the brain. So we really, I look at our heart as the great conductor of our field and our physiology, and, really modulating our health. And, my idea kind of that bringing the fascia into this is like, okay, we sustain, we create this, connection when we're in these like states of coherence, when our heart rate variability is in this coherent state, that we send out this field of organization, order, coherence that allows our brain to like, basically entrain to that information and, basically start connecting and communicating, better. And then what I think is what, the body is responding to that field through the fascial fabric. And it's basically able to basically generate coherence within its fabric. So more within the water, of the fascia and the electromagnetic field of the fascia, and basically entrain to that field that the heart is generating. And then that's a whole body signal, right? And it's a fast whole body signal. And then the fascia is touching every cell, right? So then, that is also translating that information intracellularly, because it's all kind of also the story of the fascia is that there's not really an extracellular or intracellular space. There's a connection between the extracellular and the intracellular space through integrins hooking that outer environment into the inner environment over the cell membrane and hooking it into the cytoskeleton and, into that nucleus of the cell and of the DNA. So then you start to look at this fabric, this fascia can help us create epigenetic changes, through field interactions, right? And so the heart-brain coherence is one, story of, I think, generating, if you do that more and if you live, it's hard, I have a lot of empathy, like as patients who are, often starting with me, they're like so sick, they can't even like have the energy to generate their own coherence in a lot of ways. But, and that's where we bring coherent information to them and they'll entrain to that before they can, generate it on their own. Right. But it's a really beautiful story, right, that emerges that we, by the field interactions in our body, the ones that we can modulate and generate, and then we can talk about the ones that we bring in and entrain to, we can affect our genetic expression and our protein translation and, basically bringing more order and health into our body, which I think is pretty profound, because of, this delivery of information, I believe, and what I've learned and I have a lot of smart people who have just taught me this, that I've tried to put together a model to explain to, the average person of why this works and why, why we have to look here, because we can tinker with methylation and B vitamins all day long and, like trying to detox every kind of like, metal out of the body, which is all important. Don't get me wrong. But this can be, a very powerful thing. And just another point to illustrate this is, I mentioned I like, the dispenser world. It's just kind of dry. I'm drawn to that. And I do that for a lot of my own self work. And I think the power of that work, especially in his retreats, is he creates a really potent field between his ability to entrain the group and the group kind of like entraining each other. And it's a very palpable, potent field that we all bathe in and that we entrain in. And, that potent field, I think, is what, activates a lot of this healing, that we see. But they lovingly call it the dispensed influenza. People get really sick. Just who are the average people like me, like I felt great. And then I came home like from the last one and I'm like, I don't get sick a lot. I was in bed for 3 days. And you think about it, like this is intracellular detox in the highest level, right? Like this coherent field is entraining your fascial fabric that's jiggling every cell in your body to basically eliminate toxicity and flush out the lymphatics and all of that. And it's like it's a rebirth every time, and it's a repetitive experience. And so I enjoy just that world for just stretching me to keep thinking about things like this. And how, like the how-tos, how to bring it back into like practical application. So that's why I just think there's this heart-brain fascial coherence thing happening that maybe, we have to look more into. So.
Yes, absolutely. And that makes absolute sense. And at the quantum level, of course, the fascia is part of the whole signaling conversation.
Yes.
And then, from that perspective, it's like, of course, the supplements and things are fine and helpful in certain situations. Yes. But it's like, if we're not, getting to the root cause of what's causing the chaos, or as you said, the entropy, whether it's, like sleeping next to a Wi-Fi router or having an unhealthy, having a toxic relationship or whatever it is, like all of those incoherent messages would be affecting this communication network that you're describing.
Yeah, absolutely. This like, all this non-native EMF, that we are exposed to on a regular basis, and also incoherent thoughts and, stress on many profound levels generates a lot of incoherent fields that we're circulating in. Right? And that's why nature is such a great reset, because we remember, like, what does it feel like to be in this natural state of order that we were all, I think, really born into or supposed to be, right?
Right.
And, I when I think about this, I think about like the world is only getting more stressful, more toxic, more chaotic. There's only more satellites and 5G, and it's like increasing before we solve this problem.
Banning incandescent light bulbs. It's like,
I know, totally. I know.
Like at every turn, like, come
That's
on.
my conversation after yours that, we're going to talk about these. What do we do about the no incandescent light bulbs, right? And so, we're just like, there's so many stresses, right? And I think that, when we learn about the body in this way, we all can feel empowered. Like our biggest way through these times is to cultivate on a regular basis our own inner coherence and really generate a strong, coherent electromagnetic, photonic field. And that, we want to keep strong, so we're less penetrable, we're less ability that we don't entrain to those frequencies. We have a stronger, with entrainment, it always goes to the most ordered field, right? Like, so that's why you can be a tuning fork for others, right? Your vibration can lift somebody up, right?
Right.
So
the coherence could be contagious.
Yes, I love that.
Yeah.
I love that.
Okay.
That's so right out. And so I think, one way through, not only all the things you educate and we'll educate on, but one way through is really taking ownership of, our own, field and how we move through this, world at this time.
Yeah. I love that. I think that's a beautiful place to wrap because I always like to remember that there are so many ways to come into coherence, even though there are so many things
Yeah.
coming at us. It's
Yes.
like, to your point. Yeah, exactly. It's like if we understand, then we know how to mitigate them or come back into coherence for ourselves within our own field.
Yeah.
And doing things like those those meditation retreats and the dispenser retreats, it's almost like a boot camp,
It's like an
coherence boot
upgrade.
camp, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's totally
Yeah.
it's a way to just really like work on that, like remembering like we're the strongest frequency generators out there, and
Right.
a group of us get together, we even, create a very impactful field that matters and that can change things. And I think, again, in these times, like that's a better story to stay, sink into than the other,
Yes, absolutely. And from a quantum perspective, a small shift can have a huge effect.
Oh, absolutely.
So we don't have to like change every single thing.
Yeah.
But just like a little thing can make a big difference.
Totally.
Yeah. Thank you so much,
Yes.
Christine. This was just like a beautiful conversation, and my mind is spinning. I know I'm gonna like get off with you and be like, oh, I have 8,000 more questions.
Well, we can continue this dialogue, my friend. Of course we can.
Yes, so. I would love to circle back and pick it up again because I feel like we just sort of we just touched, but there's so many places that you could take us. So next time. We'll go in a new direction. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me.
This has been the Quantum Biology Collective podcast. To find a practitioner who works from this point of view, visit our directory at quantumbiologycollective.org. If you are a practitioner, definitely check out our Applied Quantum Biology certification to consider as part of your continuing education plan. You can also just jump into our email community. We'd love to hear from you. Again, that's at quantumbiologycollective.org.